we came in.
What? Earlier this year, I released a Deltarune Fury video. Don't worry, it's not required viewing or anything. But something happened in the video making process which I thought was quite interesting. There I was, in the middle of working on the script. I've been going at it, little by little, for weeks at this point. And I started watching a Let's Play to either check on something or try to find some footage, don't quite remember. What's important is that the experience of rewatching Deltarune turned out to be a quite dissonant one. You see, I had essentially completely forgot about much of what happened in the middle part of the game. Like, 90% of both Undertale and Deltarune is a light-hearted comedy. It's a game full of little jokes and gags. The main gameplay loop essentially is to do puzzles, fight or spare enemies, and walk up to every single object, interact with them to get a gag. Not only did my video not reflect that at all, I had basically not thought about any of this for a long time. And this isn't just a me thing, I don't think. If you had never played either game and based all your knowledge of Undertale and Deltarune on lore and Fury videos, the vibe you would get is completely off. You think the game was like the serious, dark, complex and convoluted thing. And sure, that's all true, but importantly, it's also a light-hearted comedy RPG most of the time. Both are true, and that's one of the main strengths of these games. There's a lot of different ways to enjoy it. The lore and Fury stuff appeals more to me, for example, but if you want to write, I don't know, fluff Addison fanfiction or draw Rossi fan art and engage with the more, funny and light-hearted part of the game, that's a valid angle. There are like 3 games within Undertale, across various genres and vibes, quote-unquote. In that game, this is achieved by assigning each of the 3 to one of the alternate paths. Paths that get increasingly darker as you go along. I'd argue there's a pretty clear intended order for them. And I thought that was interesting, so I wanted to talk about it. The first time through Undertale was a guaranteed neutral route. Even if you manage not to kill anyone, you're gonna get a neutral ending. The defining characteristic of the neutral route experience is that it's the full-on light-hearted comedy RPG experience. It's non-stop little jokes, gag after gag after gag, but interspersed among all these jokes, however, there is a lot of sadness just under the surface that is frequently hinted at. No matter if you kill Torio or kept her alive, you say your goodbyes, her plotline is left unresolved, and it's all terribly sad. Until the skeletons appear. A lot of monsters talk about wanting to be free and having to hang out to hope despite the odds. And that's all pretty melancholic. There's also Office, who is implied to have some deeper issues and may even have depression of some sort. And of course, everything from New Home onwards, the story of Asriel and the Fused Human, Asgore just as a character in general, and his connection to Torio is all very sorrowful. This sadness is always present throughout the neutral route, almost always as a background element, with the exception of the ending, where it gets more of the spotlight. For the most part though, it's a secondary part of the experience. The primary characteristic of the neutral route is the comedy, and in that sense, it's pretty good. Undertale is a funny game, and most of the funny stuff happens during the neutral route. If Undertale was just a neutral route, it'd still be a pretty good game, and in that sense, I think it's underrated. It's weird actually, if you go deep enough into Undertale fandom, it's mostly people talking about pacifist and genocide. It's like the neutral ending doesn't matter. Realistically though, it is the comedy of the neutral route that is the main appeal for a lot of people, probably. I can admit to that, even not being the biggest fan of this type of comedy. And I'm sure there are people out there who played the neutral route, thought it was okay, but just didn't bother with the rest of the game. And that's fine. That's valid, I guess. I'm always fascinated by Undertale content that either doesn't address pacifist and genocide or that was clearly made by someone who has only played the neutral route. Recently, Point Crow, a streamer, played Undertale for the first time. I'm not familiar with him, and I just like watching blind playthroughs. But upon reaching the end of the neutral route, he said something along the lines of, "Oh, I can see why everyone likes this game now," which, of course, is very funny. He doesn't. There's also Night²'s first review of Undertale, where it's clear he only played it through it once.
Undertale is more so like this much emotional stuff and this much comedy.
To be fair to him, the review came out 2 days after the game released. And if Undertale had been like any other one-man indie game, the good ending wouldn't be that significantly different from the neutral one. So it'd be excusable to skip that in order to get your review out faster. But Undertale isn't a normal indie game. The true pacifist run is actually the exact same as the neutral route up to the marathon fight. You then get a call from Undyne and get to do some anime shenanigans in the dumpster. This is all still pretty lighthearted, just as before. But then, true life happens. I'd argue that it's at this point that the true pacifist ending actually starts. The game goes into a pretty significant tone shift. There are a few more gags here and there, but the mood is completely different from before, and it never goes back. Now all the little moments of sadness and darkness that had been implied throughout have become the main focus, and been brought to the forefront. And after the True Lab sequence, straight into the ending, which is the Asriel fight. The Asriel fight is a lot of things. It's a big visual spectacle, get one of the best songs in the game, just the big emotional climax of the whole thing. Not only do we get to revisit and reflect on all the major characters as lost souls, the subplot of Asriel and the First Human is resolved. Kind of. It's a satisfying ending, it's an emotional ending, and it feels, big and epic. It's so good, in fact, people don't even think of the neutral ending as a real ending. It adds a whole new dimension to the narrative. So much so, it's amazing that it's even optional. Suppose you were playing Undertale blind, like actually blind, and reach the neutral ending. It's likely that you either killed a random frogget or was tricked to kill either Toriel or Undyne, such that you have at least some EXP on your save file. Now if you want to get the good ending, you will need to do it all over again. And why would you? Sure, it's a short game, Flowey tells you to do it, but it's still kind of a big ask. Even if you were told that the pacifist ending was pretty good and worthwhile, you would still only play the game again if you liked it and wanted more. Duh. You need to be at least somewhat invested in the various characters and interested in the unresolved plotlines and underlying sadness of the neutral route. It's quite a brave choice if you think about it. You have some of the best sequences in the game, the emotional climax to your story, and it's entirely missable. This is not unique to Undertale. Every game with a lot of secrets must deal with this balancing act. Having cool content be hidden is like a way to reward anyone who finds it. It's like a coolness exponent, where the more hidden it is, the cooler it becomes. The better the content, however, the more you typically want everyone to see it. Undertale is unique because in terms of content goodness, the post-pacifist ending is about as high as it can get. Many of the best scenes in the game are here. It's impressive that it's even a secret at all, even if the secretness of it is fairly low. The game tells you to do it, and tells you how to do it. Something like this wouldn't fly in the past. Part of the reason why this game feels like it can afford to hide some of its best stuff like this is because of the internet. If someone didn't bother doing patches for their first time, they'd probably eventually learn about it online. But even then, having barriers to your cooler real ending means that a portion of people just won't see it, simply due to, normal audience retention. And the ones who do end up watching it are more likely to appreciate it, especially if they found it blind. I think that was the intended experience, at least. No one could have predicted that Undertale would become so insanely popular, and I think that kind of distorted the intended experience Toby had in mind. By the time I played Undertale, it was already common knowledge that you shouldn't kill anyone. And part of the reason why the early Undertale fandom was considered bad is because they were pretty toxic to anyone who, quote-unquote, played the game wrong. I wasn't there, but I heard secondhand a story about Markiplier cancelling the Let's Play because of people bitching about how they play the game, i.e. him killing monsters. But that's another topic. Anyway, once True Pacifist is over though, surely now the game is done. We got our emotional climax, most of the plotlines that had been left open have now been addressed. We even get a cool credit sequence. Surely you've got something better to do now. Haha, psych. There's still no mercy, you idiot. Technically it's possible to do genocide even before the neutral route. I've done it myself when playing on a new device. That's like saying it's possible to beat Outer Wilds in 15 minutes. Sure, if you know what to do and where to go, but that's not the internet experience. I think that's fair to say. Anyway, the Geno route is yet another big tone shift for the game. If the neutral route was the quirky, funny indie RPG where you get to date a skeleton, the True Pacifist ending was the Goat Boy-based child death feels fest. No Mercy is cosmic horror, with fourth wall breaks turned up to 11. It's a big departure from all that has happened before. It lives in its own dimension in terms of tone. Pacifist and neutral are pretty similar by contrast. A tone shift this big would be pretty difficult to pull off in a traditional linear narrative. It would require a lot of foreshadowing in advance so as not to cause tonal whiplash. Undertale manages this without any problem because it's an alternate path that the player has to actively and intentionally pursue, and so whiplash is minimized. I like to bring back audience retention analysis because looking at the genocide route through these lenses can be quite revealing, I think. First of all, compared to the Pacifist, which is ever so slightly a secret, the genocide route is a proper secret. I don't think there are any real hints about it anywhere within the game. I would argue that hearing about it from the internet or a friend was the intended experience, what Toby Fox wanted. This would mean that most of everyone who actually started down the path of the No Mercy route would have to be pretty deep into the game, especially early on. And the genocide route is, no offense, a slog. A long ride interspersed by very tough fights. All the while the game is questioning you on your actions and motivations. Why you're doing this? Why turn violent? And reminding you that things could have been better. The game takes for granted that you beat through Fast Fist. But if you stick through it and reach New Home, you get the Flowey genocide monologue. And oh, what a beautifully meta scene. Just, chef's kiss. In this monologue, Flowey answers this question for himself. Why turn violent? Well, as a flower, he didn't have a soul, and he was unable to feel connected or care deeply about the world. He was about to commit suicide when he discovered the power of determination, saving and loading. Armed with time powers, he started to experiment. Eventually, he did all there was to do, and once again, grew bored, and so he opted to try out violence. A lot is going on in this monologue. Undertale scholars will argue about this one for generations. In this scene, Flowey is in many ways a reflection of the audience. After all, we also have the ability to save and load, and we also presumably have been the game once before, done everything there is to do, and so all that's left is violence. But the audience and Flowey diverge in one interesting aspect. When Flowey talks about not being able to feel love, that's not our experience. Again, if you played through all the way up to here, through Neutral, through Past Fist, Undying, and 40 left in Hotland, then it's probably fair to assume that you like the game. Heck, you probably love the game. You love these characters way more than your average player, that's for sure. Sometimes this gets mistaken for Tobin saying that the audience is bad for playing the game. That's silly though. He made it after all. Probably took a long time. He wants people to see it. The point is lines to make you feel bad, weaponize your love for these characters by comparing you pretty directly to someone who, in his own words, is unable to feel love. This is already some pretty interesting stuff, but it's not the best part. Consider this. What's the reward for beating No Mercy? Well, the Sans fight's pretty cool. It's like the best fight in the game. A banger song contains critical lore, but once that's over, what do you actually get as a reward for beating genocide? Well, first off, Sans gets hit and starts bleeding. Undertale lore masters will know that this shouldn't be possible. Monsters are made of magic and shouldn't bleed like that. Even if you don't recall this specific line of dialogue, which, fair enough, it's kind of obscure, no monster has done before, so it's very out of place no matter how you look at it. But never mind that, because he just gets up, walks off screen before allegedly turning to dust. Very sus. Then we walk like 10 feet and run into the first human, aka Kara. Kara, aka Kara. Aren't you dead? Why are you here? How are you here? Destroy the world? What are you talking about? Since when can you do that? Then, Chara jumpscare, the game closes, and boom, darkness. Wait long enough, and who is this now? Is this still Kara, or is this someone else? Sami soul? What does that mean? What is happening? Is this happening? Is this some kind of metaphor or something? And then it ends. And that's Undertale. And that's it. Think about what's happening here. Toby made a secret ending. The steps you have to take to arrive at this point are pretty unintuitive, but once you get there, it's a mix of very tough fights and boring as hell grinding. Thinking about this in terms of audience retention, anyone who got to this point is probably more committed, invested, and interested in the game than your average player. So Toby gets all the biggest fans of the game into a room together, introduces a bunch of dead-end questions, refuses to elaborate, and leaves. So far, the game has been fairly good at maintaining sensible lore. I'm thinking of stuff like finding out about Neratone's past and the connection between the various weapons and armor and the human souls. But now, at the 11th hour, Toby just introduces a whole bunch of hopeless dead ends. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they are definitive answers to any of these questions. You could argue Nara Kara for the Kara stuff, but again, that's just a theory, and I guess you could argue also that most of these will be answered in Deltarune, but I'm not too sure of that. It's honestly really funny, no wonder the Undertale community is so brainrot with theory crafting, and this is to say nothing of Dr. Dwayne Gaster. There is some problems with this. For one, it isn't necessarily true that No Mercy filters players through commitment. There are plenty of Undertale mega fans who have never played it and just watched someone else play it, and sure, that's valid, cowards. And also, any analysis of the intended experience of a given work of art faces the problem that this is something that can change very quickly. This is particularly true for a game like Undertale, which grew to become so popular and influential. It has so much reputation and discourse tied around it that it's now essentially impossible to have this quote-unquote intended experience. Undertale got insanely huge, the No Mercy route got so memified over the years, to the point that the Sans fight, the secret final boss, a huge spoiler any way you look at it, has totally seeped into the pop culture, such that if you know anything about Undertale, it's probably the Sans fight, which, kinda fucked up. So, let's see the 3 routes. But I want to go over a few more things and also more directly address the question of the title. The way Undertale uses its paths is a big part of its appeal and a big reason for its success. I think that's fair to say. There are 3 things it does that I think are unique or interesting. 1. The alternate routes allow the game to have a huge emotional range. Undertale uses its various routes as a way to dabble in different genres, feelings, and even messages. And because these routes are optional and require active effort from the player, especially the No Mercy route, it ends up not causing much emotional whiplash. This diversity of styles helps the game feel big and deep, despite being actually quite short. 2. Though the routes represent alternate timelines, there is an intended order to them. The game uses that as a way to set up what I decided to call "but wait, there's more" moments. This is a term I came up with to describe something I notice in a lot of media. Think about it like this. The standard narrative structures tends to go introduction, rising action, climax, then wind down and ending. But wait, there's more story is the same up until the climax, but as it's winding down and seemingly heading towards the conclusion, it introduces a new conflict, picks back up again, skipping a lot of the intro and build-up part. When done right, I find, it's one of the best experiences in media. The problem is that it often fails, and when that happens, you're left with a show that just goes on for way too long. And nobody likes that. For it to work, the second climax must escalate and surpass the old one, or at the very least, take the story in an interesting new direction. Fellow Earthbound inspired indie RPG One Shot does this well, and it does it similarly to Undertale. You have the normal ending, and completing it once opens up the so-called Solstice route, which contains a new narrative that explores themes and ideas that, though present and foreshadowed in the first route, weren't the focus. Personally, I still prefer the original ending, but I think the Solstice route adds a lot, and the game is better for it. For example of a story where something like this is attempted but doesn't work as well, look at Death Note. I'll avoid spoilers, but there's a pretty natural endpoint right in the middle of the manga, but it keeps going, and if you know, you know. What follows is both too similar to the first part in terms of concept, themes and ideas, but also not as good. Consequently, a lot of people believe that Death Note would have been better if it just ended earlier, and I think that's a fair take honestly. What's amazing about Undertale is that it pulls it off twice. Pacifist BWTM's neutral and Genocide BWTM's pacifist. And it never feels overly long because it's an alternate route in the video game. The player has to willingly choose to go through with it. And thirdly, and importantly, the routes connect between themselves laterally, if that makes any sense. The heights of true pacifist ending and the lows of the Genocide route are only as powerful as they are because of the wacky, lighthearted moments of interacting with these characters during the neutral route. The existence of True Pacifist makes the entirety of the No Mercy run sting more, and the existence of No Mercy makes True Pacifist feel more meaningful and less inevitable. The Genocide route is also hugely important for depicting how these characters would act under a new set of extreme circumstances, which adds to their characterization in the other routes. The biggest, most obvious example of this is Undying. I feel like her depiction as the Undying is a major point of her character, and that colors her behavior all over the game. To paraphrase an Undertale analysis I really like, each of the routes works as subtext to all the others. This helps the world feel more complex and alive. Anyway, yeah, that's about what I wanted to say. Those are just some thoughts. This was supposed to be a shorter video, but of course, that didn't happen. I have some ideas of future videos, and in fact, this very script came from another script that was getting too long, so I decided to, separate it out. Don't get your hopes up about that one. It's still a mess. It might never see the light of day. Regardless, next video probably won't be an essay, and there's probably nothing coming anytime soon, so don't get your hopes up. Oh, also, I'd like to shout out an essay, A Patrician Perspective Reading Undertale by Andy Tursley. That's right, the other Andrew. That really influenced this script, and it's such a travesty that the video only has like 5,000 views. I commend you to watch it right now. I'm leaving it in the description and somewhere else. Anything else? I don't think so.
Isn't this where